The Dragon's Dogma 2 community is on fire at the moment, and it's not for the reasons you think. I'm not trying to cash in late on the whole microtransaction fiasco or how bad the performance issues are. No, this is something totally different, and it's really interesting observing this sort of back and forth the community is going through. For anyone who's unfamiliar with the whole microtransaction situation, I recommend checking out any of the hundreds of videos out there covering it in detail, but I do think it serves as an important backdrop to the situation. So, long story short, Dragon's Dogma 2 released with many microtransactions at launch. Rage baiters saw some of the items and put out a lot of misinformation saying how you can't change your character's appearance without purchasing an item from the store, or that Capcom is selling save slots, all of which are totally untrue, since you can change your appearance with obtainable in-game items, and save slots simply just don't exist in the vocabulary that is Dragon's Dogma. And while the situation did end up sparking legitimate discussion about the role of microtransactions and how it can undermine single-player focused experiences, most fans, both old and new, determined that the issue was blown way out of proportion and were still able to find a lot of enjoyment out of the game. Anyone who's playing this game is inclined to agree. This game is incredibly fun, it is immersive, and some might even go so far as to say that it's addictive. Dragon's Dogma 2 puts you in a huge fantasy open world setting that looks ripped straight out from a scene of Lord of the Rings or Frieren. The music is relaxing when journeying and intense during combat, and the combat itself is really satisfying. But those same fans who would sing this game's praises in spite of the dumpster fire that is happening on online forums in the background are starting to change their mind. A lot of these criticisms are appearing over on Reddit, and if you look for some certain keywords over on X, one criticism that sticks out that practically nobody is bothering to defend is the quality of the main story. This user says that the story is atrocious, the pacing is a joke, the characters are barely used. A lot of the replies are agreeing with the sentiment. One user says that after an important story fight, it felt like it would begin Act 2, but since it didn't, or Act 2 had little substance, they feel the game is unfinished. Another user criticizes the story of Vermouth and Bakhbatal, which are main storyline settings. Vermouth puts a lot of emphasis on the story of the Queen Regent Disa, her son Sven, and attempts to spotlight the political intrigue surrounding this setting and these characters. But it falls flat when the game assigns you stealth missions to spy on Disa. Stealth missions that have paper-thin stealth mechanics and have a very easy solution, usually involving your character simply disguising themselves as a guard. Bakhbatal, in their words, is straight up offensive for how bad it is, saying that the pacing is totally shot and it felt really rushed. Now, without getting too deep into spoilers, I have beaten the game myself and I've read a lot of these comments, and the overall sentiment seems to be that Dragon's Dogma 2 does a very good job hyping up portions of the game surrounding the main story, only for the game to fall completely flat at delivering any satisfaction from it. Here you have a meme. To everybody complaining about enemy variety or lack of originality in Dragon's Dogma 2, it's not my fault, I just need a bigger budget. Please give me more money so I can show you my true vision in Dragon's Dogma 3. Now, there are a lot of memes popping up about how few enemy types there are, and I get it. A lot of what you're fighting are either goblins, saurians, wolves, or harpies, or any of their minor variations. Not only are there few types of enemies, these are the most common, and these small encounters are really frequent, creating a strong sense of repetitiveness. Hideaki Itsuno, the director of Dragon's Dogma 2, claims the solution to travel being boring is having a fun game, and so I think the encounters and the enemy density are a huge part of his solution. I myself always consider it a treat when running into an encounter with a large enemy while traveling, but the small enemies in contrast are not as engaging once you get the hang of them, and happen so often. Here one user says, just wait until they start Dragon's Dogma 2 Darker Arisen, that's where it'll have enemy variety. A lot of the replies are practically begging for an expansion to Dragon's Dogma 2, similar to Dark Arisen, an expanded version of Dragon's Dogma 1 released 7 years after the original game. Some people note that Itsuno had nothing to do with Dark Arisen, which is ironic because prior to all of this recent criticism, Itsuno was being held in high regard, similar to legendary video game producer Yoshi P. Here we have a quote of Itsuno with VG247, but I've basically done all I could with this game. Of course, I would have liked to do some more, but this definitely doesn't feel unfinished. I don't want to give the impression at all that this is a game with incompleteness, but I always feel like as an artist or as a creator, I could do more and I could go further in the future. This is the game I want to launch that's launching. So this quote here was used ironically in a post about 11 days ago, and you can see many replies to this thread expressing their hopes and dreams for this game to take off, almost as if they were all sharing in a collective dream for this game's success alongside Itsuno. One user here isn't sure that an expansion of Dragon's Dogma 2 would be considerably better, because it seems like this game is in many ways a step backwards despite the feedback Capcom would have received from the 2 previous titles. This thread reads, "Some people just expected something more than base Dragon's Dogma 1 visual remaster for $70. Here you have a reply saying, for real, this game doesn't improve upon any aspect from its predecessor except for the graphics. Equipment slots were reduced from 7 to 4, removing layered equipment. Active skills reduced from 6 to 4, over a dozen removed spells from Wizard and Sorcerer, no holy or dark boons." I'm not going to read the whole entire thing, but you get the picture. The biggest takeaway I can get out of this is that the game feels dumbed down and simplified compared to Dragon's Dogma 1 Dark Arisen. Now personally, I can't speak much to this as someone who's only spent maybe a handful of hours on Dragon's Dogma 1 years ago, but I can sympathize with fans of the series feeling as if they got less of a game for all these changes. A lot of the fun in Dragon's Dogma 2, at least to me, is in the details. Stabbing a Cyclops in the eye is a critical hit. You can force a griffin to flee and hop on its back as it gets away to follow it to its nest. You freeze enemies by first giving them frostbite, then drenching them, or the reverse order, that's fine too. So when these details and ways to fine-tune your playstyle are taken away, that can really suck. Now, what I want to do here is talk about my own experiences with the game and why I think that a lot of what's being said here is valid and maybe indicative of a larger issue. After beating the game once myself, I have to say that this game does feel very squished at the end. After arriving at Vermouth, you are promised a large, sprawling world. It tells you that not only do your decisions matter, but time matters. And the game feels incredible in the beginning when you are taking in the sights and immersing yourself in an adventure that at first feels all your own. And I think it is in these expectations that are being built up as you play the game where dreams go to die. The storyline surrounding Vermouth never really rewards you with the huge payoff at the end of after building up Queen Regent Disa and the False Arisen. Shortly after tying up all the quests in the capital, or at least the main storyline ones anyway, you're soon thrust into the region of Batal and its one city, Bak Batal. These characters are flat, they don't develop, and you interact with them in only a mission or two. When you get to the post-game, characters are either reduced to a shade of what they once were, or worse, completely change how they feel about you. Phases, for example. Overall, I think the real reason why Dragon's Dogma 2 is resounding so poorly with its community right now is ironically because the game does feel underdeveloped. This game has a lot of great ideas, but it also feels like this game spread itself a little too thin. And that's not me trying to discount what the game does really well. I actually think that this game is amazing, and we'll get to that. But I do think that the game has a lot of ideas that feel half-baked. These are some minor spoilers, but I feel like it's hard to give concrete examples without them, so bear with me. The entire nation of Batal, for example, or at least what we have access to, has only one city. One, at like total. There's no minor city, there's nothing else, it's just one city. The elves have an entire language that your pawns can learn and translate for you, but the elves themselves only have one small town, if you could even call it that. Agamen Volcanic Island isn't very large at all, but it's semi-gated by story content, and once you complete that story content, it kind of tries to rush you through to the end of the game. There are 3 major regions in this game, and each of them basically have a large, gaping hole where there's absolutely nothing but unexplorable mountainous area. It feels like legitimately there is a lot of cut content. As for the enemy variety, I feel like it's a shame that some enemies are only available and appear in the post-game content. This isn't to say that this game is bad. Far from it, in fact. Many players don't really share these sentiments, and these people are far from invalid as well. A lot of players are saying that a majority of the complaints are coming from people binging and or rushing through the game, and they're not wrong. I myself am in a position where I want to see as much of the game as fast as possible so that I can make guides. While there aren't many people in that same position, there are plenty of players, true gamers as they like to call themselves, who are very driven to beat the game in the sense of completing the main story, and someone who has that as their main goal will undoubtedly place a lot of value in the quality of the main story. While doing so, they very likely will get annoyed at the lack of enemy types because by the end of the game, they'll be able to look back and realize that there weren't that many. And of course, if you take options and customization away from a Redditor, it'd be the same as if you were trying to take milk from a baby. What I want to say in defense of the game, and for anyone that is discouraged by these comments, is that Dragon's Dogma 2 remains an incredible experience. What I feel like a lot of the complaints are missing is the journey to the end. Yes, there isn't much variation in the small encounters, but experiencing these small encounters for the first few times are incredible. Being dragged by a pack of wolves, watching a female pawn get abducted and slobbered over by an ogre, encountering the Sphinx, slaying dragons, these are all immensely fun and incredibly detailed experiences. There are not many games where you can push a Cyclops over a gap to use them as a bridge or send them into the brine. There are plenty of classes, and each of them offer very different experiences as well. There are a lot of great things about Dragon's Dogma 2. The combat isn't necessarily gritty like a Souls-like game, but I would argue that nothing feels quite as visceral and satisfying as landing a well-placed stone splitter on just about any enemy as a warrior, or launching yourself with a magic spear straight into a Cyclops' one eyeball. Even with all the complaints, I can't discount the fact that the gameplay is super enjoyable. I feel like this is a recurring theme, unfortunately, for many open world games. For Breath of the Wild, I was let down that there were only 4 divine beasts. For Skyrim, you only need to kill 3 or 5 dragons to complete the main story. For Palworld, there are only 5 tower bosses and 137 pals to catch. I think with an open world game, it's very easy to be hooked on the premise and to let your expectations run wild as you slowly feel out the world and its mechanics. An open world game inherently promises near limitless possibilities. I think we easily forget that an open world game is still very much, in fact, closed. There are limitations to what you can do. If the main feature is that the game is a sandbox where you can throw any NPC into a water with evil tentacles eating them, then the on-the-rails storytelling and the characters are usually going to have to take a back seat and suffer as a consequence. There is a hard limit to the things you can do in these games, and the most painful experience when you're flying around free like a bird is when you hit the glass wall. Unfortunately, you are very much in a bubble, and I don't think I've ever not run into this feeling when playing an open world game. There's no such thing as a perfect game for everyone, and very few games can and are much less designed to be played forever. Dragon's Dogma 2 is not the exception, but it is still very much a great game, worthy of your time and praise, with incredible moments unique to its experience. I think what easily gets lost upon Journey's end is the journey itself, and even if that also is not perfect, I at least won't be the one to say that it wasn't worth it. But those are my thoughts on the topic. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. My name is Renu, and I'll see you all on the next one. Peace.